Actually, before I begin, I was wondering, would you guys be okay if I took a selfie? Sure. Thank you. Okay, so I'm just gonna turn this on, and then, yeah. As I came all the way here, I thought, why not? Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Okay, yeah, so I'm Tian. I'm a digital product designer, or you may have heard of the terms UX, UI. So that's what I specialize in. And currently I'm working at a fintech startup in Toronto, Canada called PayMe, and I'm also working for Consensus part-time as a contractor. But I'm also in a transitionary phase because I'm going to be moving from PayMe to another company by the end of March. Yeah, and so that's the way to contact me if you want to capture that information right now. We can always circle back to this slide later. Okay, so first I'll start by telling you how I found out about the Kleros Fellowship and why I decided to join. There are really 3 major reasons, and they are I love blockchain. I've been in the blockchain world ever since 2015 when I first met Vitalik Buterin, who's the founder of Ethereum. And it's just been an amazing journey in this space. I love it to bits and pieces, or I love it to bitcoins and pieces. It's just such a fascinating world. It's and like I could gush about it on and on about why I love this space so much, but I'll just sum it up by saying it really it represents the next evolutionary step of the internet, and that's why it excites me. You may have heard of the term Web3. That's why. So number 2, I love product design or digital product design. I've been doing that also ever since 2015. So my educational background is in human factors engineering, which is all about human-centered design. And then last but not least, I love to make a positive social impact, to which I believe Kleros is also trying to do. Yeah, so that is not a journey ever since 2015, but that's been a journey ever since I was a young boy. Yeah, so when I saw this opportunity, I just thought it was a great opportunity to make a better future, or design a better future. Yeah. Quickly walk through what I did. So I did a bunch of research at the beginning, and that included reading a lot of the materials that Kleros had. The blog is crazy, too much to read. I read through, I don't know how many I read through, probably like 10 plus articles. And then I read through a bunch of legal design articles from Stanford University. And then apart from the secondary research, I also did primary research. So I sent out a survey to people that I thought might be a fit for using the Kleros-CRED. And so the results of that survey, as well as the results of my usability testing, was gathered in those colorful columns you see over there. I know you can't see what they are, but the point is I did a lot of research, and that's the proof. You just have to believe me. What else does it say over there? Yeah, my research essentially was, well, so it's UX research. It's not your typical kind of like academic research. But nowadays UX research is becoming its own discipline, and there are a lot of master's students who can specialize in that. And so yeah, so UX research involved primarily targeting people who are of the millennial generation, young professionals, as well as legal practitioners. And then yeah, so the second thing that I did was I determined a happy path to design for, or to update in terms of the design, because the scope of this project was, like, I mean, technically I could have worked on anything, or everything, because the project is so huge, and there's this entire ecosystem of products, right? And I wish I could have even delved deeper into the crypto-economic side of things, like incorporated a lot of what William has done into my design work. But it was just too much, and I was already juggling a full-time contract at that point in time as well, and so this was a part-time thing for me. And so I had to boil the scope down to something manageable, and that was, I determined what the happy path of that I should be focused on. So what does happy path mean in the world of product design? It just means what is like the most optimal path of getting from point A to point B, or origin to destination, or rather, the happy path is origin to destination, and then what I focused on was trying to optimize that happy path. So, like the happy path of Airbnb, for example, is you go on the site, you search for a place to book, and then you book it. You conclude that booking process. That's the happy path, right? Very simple. So for this, I had to figure out what that happy path was for the user. And so that happy path, I'll explain in the next slide. And then the last thing I did was just apply a bunch of design principles throughout my work. And so these design principles, one of the most popular ones is the 10 usability heuristics for user interface design by the NN group. Yeah, so I'll move on to the next slide. So the happy path was basically the following. 3 main steps. The user needs to first approach a case, then access the case, then arbitrate the case. In other words, it means first, to approach a case, it's basically the onboarding process. Accessing a case is the court selection and staking process, and then arbitrating a case is the case arbitration or dispute resolution process. I've been to a bunch of talks before in my life, design talks as well, and usually what people like to do is they focus on the high level. But for me, I'm just gonna, in these next like 10 or so slides, be more tactical and just walk you through all the design decisions I made, so what I made and why. But I'll be like very brisk about it, because there's like 10 plus of these slides. And if you want to learn more, I wrote this huge case study. It's like 40 plus pages. I know it sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of images, so don't worry, it's an easy read. But yeah, it explains all of my design decisions in greater detail, and it explains just the entire process in greater detail. Okay, so I first began to focus on on the information architecture of the product. What I was given at the time, there was a lot of confusion with respect to the language or the nomenclature and navigation of the product. And what it was I was presented with like this top main navigation that had cases, courts, cases, governance, guides, and there was tokens, and there was another option there. So I streamlined that. I streamlined that because also the language didn't make sense. When I tested against the legal practitioners, for example, they told me that, courts and courtrooms mean the same thing to me. They don't mean anything different, but Kleros had to find them differently. So the fact that there was this mismatch of mental models, and there was like a few other things, meant that I had to rejig that. And so I proposed this update of the nomenclature to be, instead of courts, courtrooms, and subcourts, it would be courthouse, court lobby, and courtrooms, in which courthouse includes the court lobby, which gives people access to the courtrooms. So, because that makes more sense, information architecture-wise. My updated navigation basically had courthouse as the homepage, essentially, and then court lobby was a drop-down, which would include all the courtrooms that you could join. And a courtroom basically is just a category of cases. So like a courtroom could be the freelance courtroom, another courtroom could be the construction courtroom, and then in which inside there'll be cases that pertains to that category. So it would be those two as the main navigation items, and then there'll be buy tokens as a big CTA to the right, is what I proposed, and then you have and then I didn't really change much with respect to the other options like the bell icon and the profile icon and whatnot. So yeah, that's a major change I proposed. Next, I focused on the sub-navigation, and very briefly, so yeah, these first few slides is going to be like the molecules of the product, and then I'll be focusing on the organisms of the product. So is anyone here a designer? I'm curious. Oh, okay, two. And I know plenty was supposed to be here too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey,
plenty.
Yeah. Awesome. If you've heard of the term atomic design just means that there are small elements that build up into the bigger elements of the product. So these first few slides are focusing on the molecules, and then I'll talk about the organisms, which are the layouts. So sub-navigation, before, after, and the middle one at the bottom, that's what is currently implemented as the updated version of what was original, and the original one is to the top left. So major change I made here was just make the sub-navigation look more pronounced. I emphasized on, just made it, because before, like, you could see it's just like text in front of a white background and then a button, and so it's very basic looking. But what I proposed and what they've implemented is they've emphasized information better, just the coloring and the topography of everything. Just the eyes can figure out the information better. Okay, this is this like swim lane of the three main KPIs or three main metrics, not KPIs, that the user should care about. The before shot, the after shot, and then that's what they've currently implemented. So originally there was the ether scan, and then there was like the two metrics of staked and locked PNK. I had updated that to just be focused on how much PNK they own, how much is locked, and how much is staked, because the ether scan with the ether amount, it means that the user would be introduced to two pieces of information that would be kind of confusing. And it's just like, I already have to deal with the fact that I'm introduced to a new paradigm, and this new paradigm involves cryptocurrencies, but now you're giving me two different tokens, and I have to manage that in my brain, and that's a bit hard. So I just made that easier. And then, they've implemented that to be focused on the three PNK values. Another one of these molecule updates I did was the staking cards. So this card you see when you enter into the court lobby, you first have to stake, right? So this is a part of the staking process. So the before shot was unhovered versus a hovered staked. 2 minutes? Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, I don't know how to be okay. You can kind of see the obvious changes I made. I made things more I emphasized on things. Pieces of content. I'm sorry, I feel rushed. So, okay. Well, and that's the change that they have implemented up until this point to the right. More before, after, and then. So these are the case cards. And then the onboarding. Very briefly, before what was originally the onboarding was just a welcome screen, in which before that, like when you go to courts.kleros.io, you would be introduced to a MetaMask screen. So you have to log in through MetaMask, and then you will be introduced to a welcome screen. What I introduced or proposed is to have a tutorial in the form of a demo of what the approaching, accessing, and arbitrating a case experience is like. And so before and after of that home screen when they first log in is that where I have an empty state that tells them that they've joined 0. And so this I didn't change much. This is the courtroom selection modal. And that's because it's technically a bit more of a intense thing to change, I think, so I didn't really change that as much. So this is the staking pages. So before shot and after shot. You'll see I introduced a major element here, and that is the bottom action bar. So the bottom action bar was introduced to make it clear to the user that, yes, they may have staked a courtroom successfully, but they still have to be chosen to be a juror. And so in the bottom action bar is something that tells the user when they've been chosen, and then the CTA will become active, which would say join courtroom, because they've now been selected, so they can join. So they would hit that to join, because originally it was confusing. They weren't sure if they were already in the courtroom or not. And so this is now they're in the courtroom. before shot, after shot. In the after shot, they basically just have to select one of the cases and hit and go into it to view the case. I've also introduced another element at the bottom of that page, and it's what I like to call the community lane. It's basically like this bottom bar that introduces data about the community, like but like anonymously, of course. Just like to give the user the understanding that they are using a tool that has activity that other users are a part of. And then this is the case details page before, after, and what they've currently implemented. No, wait, that's not what they've currently implemented. That is, that is just the screen that appears after they've selected accept or refuse, or, plaintiff or defendant. So I made a lot of changes here, but I'll focus on one of the main changes I made was I introduced, so I did two main changes. I introduced more information to help the user make the correct legal decision or the most honest decision. And by more information, I mean stuff like just like legislation policies and whatnot. And then another major change was before, originally, they were just given the information presented by the defendant, and they weren't given the information presented by the plaintiff, so I just introduced this like two buttons that they could switch between plaintiff and defendant, and what they both, like their cases, essentially. And then this is just like the dashboard after they've joined successfully, after they've interacted and used the app, the before and after shots. So insights and takeaways. So four main insights and takeaways. I think blockchain transforms all tech industries into a fintech product, because blockchain introduces the element of the crypto token, right? And that sounds like a big statement. I mean, like all dApps, really, or decentralized applications are essentially a fintech application. Blockchain transforms law into a more accessible space. It transforms how we onboard users, and it transforms, I think, digital products altogether. Now I'm just going to quickly explain what I mean by that. So you might have heard, we should really just hide all the blockchain stuff under the hood and keep the user experience super simple and easy, right? But the thing is, first off, super easy, simple, these are very subjective terms. We need to be more nuanced with what we mean by that and more scientific in those words. But the second thing I want to say is, what if a car salesperson came up to you and said, I have a car, it is so much better than every other car in the market, but it's going to feel like exactly the same. It's like, you're not going to feel the difference. Would you believe this person? Obviously not, right? So if a person said, this dApp, it feels like every other app you've ever used, but it's better. It introduces a new paradigm of doing things. That's almost the equivalent of that car salesperson saying this car is much better, even though, but everything is under the hood. And it's going to feel like exactly the same. So there has to be some user experience differences, but of course they shouldn't create friction, which is a main thing that user experience has to do. Is we should reduce friction, but we shouldn't be afraid to introduce new paradigms, new ways of doing things for the user. I mean, for example, when Tinder introduced the whole swipe left to right thing, that was a brand new thing we've never seen before, right? And now every dating app is using it, and it's like nobody ever said that we shouldn't do it just because it's new, right? And then, I wish I had enough time to explain why I included this slide, but I don't think I have enough time. Am I right? Okay. All right. So my experience with the Kleros Fellowship, I'll just quickly end by saying, was a very revealing experience. I learned a lot. I wish I actually had more time and could actually work with them full time. And after hearing the talk by William, I'm just like, oh my gosh, yes, I want to be able to delve deeper into this so that I can do more. There is so much more to do, and I love it. It was a great experience. Thank you.